Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Mr. Douglas Sports Show. I am your host as always, Corey Douglas. And before I get into what was a super wild card weekend from last weekend, we do have some Cowboys news because why not? The Cowboys stay in the headlines, and that's just the way Jerry Jones wants it. He doesn't really care about the results on the field, if you ask me. He cares about the attendance and making sure the Cowboys stay in the headlines. And this week, the Cowboys made headlines by first getting rid of defensive coordinator Mike Nolan, which we knew probably midway through the season that was likely. And they hired Dan Quinn as the new defensive coordinator. So Dan Quinn, he just spent 6 years in Atlanta as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. He was the head coach back in 2016 when the Atlanta Falcons blew the 28-3 lead against the Patriots in a Super Bowl that people will never forget. But before that, he was a defensive coordinator back in Seattle. And back in Seattle, if you remember, they had the Legion of Boom when you had Cam Chancellor, you had Earl Thomas, you had Richard Sherman, Bobby Wagner, all those guys. He coached them and was part of the back-to-back Super Bowl runs that Seattle made. So for me, I think that was probably the best hire that's out there. And I think the best thing about this hire is that this Cowboys defense gets to go back to something they were familiar with. So now throughout this entire season, the Cowboys players and the media, they were talking about how the players just weren't adapting to Mike Nolan's system. And it took them too long to finally adapt to that system. And by that time, like I said, it was too late. Mike Nolan was already getting pushed out the door. So this gets them back to something they're familiar with. Now, the hiring of Dan Quinn doesn't just automatically make this defense, the Legion of Boom Seattle defense back in 2013 and 2014. The Cowboys do need some players. And for me, looking at the roster, to me, the Cowboys need at least 6 or 7 quality starters on that defense. Right now, I think we have 3 or 4, and 2 of those are questionable. The 4 names that I'm thinking of are DeMarcus Lawrence, Randy Gregory, Trevon Diggs, and Donovan Wilson. I think those are 4 pieces of that defense that you can really build around. But the rest of them are incredibly important to make sure that we can fill. Which is going to be really important for how the Cowboys approach free agency. Now, with the COVID season and the salary cap expected to either stay the same or possibly drop, it's going to be hard for a lot of teams to make the necessary moves as far as signing free agents and do things outside of the draft. So that's going to be really important for the Cowboys. But along with Dan Quinn becoming the defensive coordinator, you had the Cowboys hire Joe Whitt as the secondaries coach. He's coming from Atlanta. He was there under Dan Quinn's staff. And Joe Whitt is a guy that the Cowboys actually interviewed for the defensive coordinator spot. And guess why he got that opportunity? You guessed it. It's because he worked under Mike McCarthy for years and years in Green Bay. And he spent the last couple of years in Atlanta. And regarding Joe Whitt, so some things that I've heard about him since coming over and why they made that hire is because Joe Whitt is known as an incredible teacher. He's able to relate to players. And it was important for the Cowboys to establish a coaching staff that worked really well together, because that was an issue that came up consistently through this past season where the coaches, they weren't communicating with each other well, and that was causing, of course, friction among the players, which led to some of the stories that you heard come out during the season. So while Joe Whitt didn't have a ton of success in Atlanta, they feel like he can come here and work well with the coaching staff and hopefully turn in, some of these secondary players into some really good players. And more importantly than these coaching hires, I'm more interested to see how the Cowboys approach free agency, because last offseason it was a complete disaster. They went bargain shopping for defensive tackles. Dontari Poe, who was awful and ended up getting shipped out of here. Everson Griffin got shipped out of here. Gerald McCoy didn't even make it to a game before he got hurt in training camp. So what the Cowboys need to do this offseason is they actually need to take free agency as serious as they can and try to find the best players that are available, instead of going to the bottom of the free agency stack and digging through those players who can't really play in the league. There's a reason they're free agents. So I think my most important needs for the Dallas Cowboys is to get an interior lineman that can sit right in the middle of the line and dictate coverage to keep blockers off the linebackers, and maybe Jalen Smith and Leighton Vander Esch can improve at that point. And then my second biggest need for the Cowboys is to get another ball playmaking safety. Donovan Wilson has shown flashes of that, but I think we still need another one along with a corner. The secondary and the interior of the defensive line are going to be crucial needs for this Cowboys team, and we will get more into that as the offseason gets started. After the Super Bowl, and once we start hearing some rumors there. But now I want to go turn my attention to what we saw in Super Wildcard Weekend. There were some surprising things, some things that weren't so surprising. So let's just go ahead and get started with the first game of the weekend, which was the Indianapolis Colts going to Buffalo. Colts suffer a 3-point loss. And the storyline coming out of this one was that Phillip Rivers' last game as a Colts or as an NFL quarterback? So Phillip Rivers throughout the season, he had times where he looked like prime Phillip Rivers, but there was also times where he looked like the old quarterback he is. And I think both him and the Colts have some decisions to make in that regard, as far as, do the Colts want Rivers back, and does Rivers want to play or go spend time with the 13 kids that he has back home in California. Then we went out to Seattle, and the Los Angeles Rams basically dominated the Seattle Seahawks, and it just finished off the collapse that Seattle had down the stretch as far as their offense goes. Now they're talking about, instead of letting Russ cook, they're actually going to take the supplies away from him and make sure they can run the ball more efficiently and more often in Seattle, because Russell Wilson letting him cook didn't really work out. So they go home in the first round. And then you go to Washington at the nightcap. Tampa Bay goes into Washington. They beat the Washington football team. Tom Brady continues and adds another playoff win to his resume. And now he gets another shot, a third chance to beat the Saints, which we'll get into in just a second. But the main storyline of that one is Tyler Heinicke. Is he the quarterback that they can move forward with in Washington, or do they still try to trade up or find another quarterback there to take over? Then going to Sunday's game, the first game of the day was the Baltimore Ravens versus the Tennessee Titans. Lamar Jackson gets his first playoff win, which I don't think he played entirely well, but with Lamar Jackson, he made that one game-changing play where he ran on 3rd and 9 for a 40-plus yard touchdown, the longest touchdown run by a quarterback in NFL history. But I think the story about this game was Baltimore's defense and their ability to shut down Derrick Henry. For the first time in Derrick Henry's career, he had at least 18 rushes and couldn't eclipse 40 yards. So I think that was more important than Lamar Jackson's struggles. And it's going to be a different ball game in Buffalo, which we'll get to that in just a second as well. But going on to the second game on Sunday, the Chicago Bears versus the New Orleans Saints. This game went about as you could expect. The only chance that Chicago had in this game was to be able to open up the playbook and let Mitch Trubisky try to make enough plays. Obviously, that didn't happen. They get shut down for the majority of the game. They score a last-second touchdown to Jimmy Graham, which was an incredible catch. But the Saints did what they were expected to do. Defense was able to stifle the Bears' offense. Saints move on. Then the most surprising outcome of the game, or the night, or a Super Wildcard Weekend, was the Cleveland Browns and the performance they put out in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh went from 11-0 to a first-round exit in the playoffs. And the story of this game was the Steelers just don't know how to shut up. Of course, Juju said the Browns are going to be the Browns leading into that game. And then you have Chase Claypool even after the game saying, well, it doesn't matter, we lost because Cleveland's going to get clapped by Kansas City. Which, shut up, who cares? You guys lost, go away. But this game was all about Big Ben and his decision making and just his turning the ball over 4 times, and Cleveland immediately jumps out to a 28-0 lead in the first quarter, and they pretty much coast. Although it did get kind of shaky late in the game, they were able to make enough plays. And I think the biggest play in this game was Mike Tomlin cowering in the big moment on 4th and 1, deciding to punt when they were down 35-23 with the opportunity to make it 35-30. They don't convert on 4th and 1. Cleveland gets the ball, drives right down, makes it 42-23, and that was all she wrote for that game. And the Steelers are going home with a lot of questions this offseason to answer, and it all starts with Big Ben at quarterback. Will he return? Will he retire? Because, you know, anytime Big Ben struggles, he throws out the retirement word. So we'll see what happens there. But that all of that sets up a very, very interesting divisional round, and I think all 4 matchups are incredibly interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look at those matchups coming up. So the first game up on this divisional round weekend is the Los Angeles Rams going back on the road this week to Green Bay, the number 1 seed Packers. It's expected to be really cold in the mid-20s. There may be a chance of snow, but this game is the most interesting game to me, or the game I'm most excited for, because we get to see an all-pro cornerback, Jalen Ramsey, take on an all-pro receiver, Davante Adams. If you look at Jalen Ramsey's numbers throughout the season, he's been shutting down opposing number 1 receivers throughout the entire season. He hasn't allowed more than 100 yards to any of them. The most yards that he gave up this season was to Amari Cooper all the way back in week 1 with 57 yards on 7 catches. And if you, of course, you know Davante Adams, he emerged into what looks like the best receiver in the game this season. And this is what this game is all about. Your best versus their best, and let's see what happens. But to me, aside from that, this game will come down to, can Green Bay contain the Rams running game? Of course, the Rams still have questions at quarterback, with both quarterbacks banged up, John Wolford and Jared Goff. We'll see which one gets to start. Jared Goff ended up having to play after Wolford got banged up in Seattle. But I think if Green Bay can contain this running game for the Rams, I think they will be able to come away with a win, just because they have Aaron Rodgers, and I think he will find a way to make enough plays to win this game and advance to the NFC title game. And then Saturday night, we have the Baltimore Ravens heading to Buffalo to take on the Buffalo Bills. And what this game comes down to me is, it comes down to the 2 quarterbacks. Which one is going to make less mistakes? Lamar Jackson, who's already complaining about playing in the cold weather and potentially snow, and Josh Allen, who it can slip up and make a couple boneheaded plays as far as turnovers go, fumbling the ball, or, you know, just making ill-advised throws. So for me in this game, I am going to trust the quarterback who is more used to playing in the cold weather, and the one quarterback that's not complaining. Like I said, Lamar Jackson is already complaining about how he doesn't like to play in snow, and I think that is an issue, because if you ask any of these players in the league today about what it takes to play in the cold weather, and they go straight off of mindset. You have to trick yourself into thinking that you're not as cold as the next man on the opposing team. Lamar Jackson's already on the wrong side of that. So I think Buffalo wins, and I think they sit there and wait for the opponent, or the winner of Cleveland and KC, which play on Sunday. Which leads me to the first game on Sunday afternoon. And I do want to say this just before I go any further. I know I've picked the two home teams so far, but I wouldn't be surprised if all 4 road teams, I think all 4 road teams have a chance to win this weekend. But Cleveland going to KC, like I mentioned, that was the most shocking result that we had from Super Wildcard Weekend, by Cleveland going into Pittsburgh and just dismantling them. But I think this is going to be a game where the Browns have the blueprint to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. That blueprint is they're going to want to run the football. And on defense, I think you saw that on defense, from a defensive standpoint, they want to limit the big plays. went into last game against Pittsburgh saying we are not going to get beat deep. We're going to play 2 high safeties. And I think that is the same approach that you'll have against KC. Make KC go on those 10, 11, 12 play drives to end up scoring their touchdowns and eliminate the big plays, 70-yard, Tyreek Hill, explosive bomb type plays. So I think that is crucial. But I don't see Cleveland being able to go to KC and win that game. I think KC has been waiting for this moment the entire season. They are looking to get back to winning another Super Bowl, go back to back. And I think ultimately Patrick Mahomes will do it this weekend. Then to finish off divisional round weekend, we have the Tampa Bay Bucks heading to New Orleans to take on the Saints for the 3rd time. And for me, this is a matchup where the Saints have taken it personally all season. If you look at the times that they've met this season, of course you go back to week 1. All the hype. The Bucks have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Gronk is back, Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette. You know, all this talent. And, you know, the Saints are going, okay, you're coming to our house. And they put a beat down on them that game. And then you look at the second matchup where New Orleans went to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was on a roll. They were rolling, clicking on all cylinders. They had added Antonio Brown at this point. And they go out and beat them 38-3. So, like I said, this is a matchup the Saints have taken personally. And I don't expect that to change this week. But I do expect this matchup to go a different way this week. I think it's going to be a much closer game. And I am taking Tom Brady on the road to beat New Orleans and not lose to the same team for the 3rd time this season. So give me the Bucks on the road against the Saints. So for my predictions, I have the Packers winning, I have Buffalo winning, I have the Chiefs winning, and then I have the Bucks winning. So next week I have Josh Allen heading to KC to take on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. And then I have Tampa Bay going on the road to take on Aaron Rodgers and the Packers in a rematch of that early season matchup where the Bucks got the best of the Packers 38-10. This is going to be a really interesting playoff round, and I'm really excited to watch all 4 of these games. And before I get out of here, I have to go over the big news in the NBA from this week. And of course that is James Harden heading to Brooklyn to pair up with Kevin Durant and maybe Kyrie Irving, depending on if he wants to play the rest of the season or not. Who knows what Kyrie's doing, but let's go ahead and get into that real quick before I get out of here. So on paper, of course, with that trade, James Harden teaming up with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, of course, everybody is just throwing Brooklyn just right into the championship mix if they didn't already have them there. Of course, my preseason prediction included the Brooklyn Nets taking on the Los Angeles Lakers. But that was contingent on if Kyrie and KD could stay sane for the entire season. Obviously, Kyrie is already just away from the team for personal matters. He didn't even communicate that with the head coach, Steve Nash. And now you add in another headache with James Harden. I feel bad for Steve Nash having to deal with all these personalities as a first-year head coach. But to me, I hate this from the standpoint of I love that the players are in control of their futures, more so in the NBA than any other sport. But at the same time, I hate the way James Harden went about this situation. And I said from the very beginning that I think the Houston Rockets should have kept James Harden away until this situation was resolved. But at the same time, I wouldn't have rushed to make the deal if the deal wasn't right for me. But at the end of the day, James Harden gets what he wants. He gets to team up with KD. And I honestly don't see this working. I think I look at Philadelphia, I look at Milwaukee, and those are 2 teams that they're going to have to take care of in that Eastern Conference. And I don't know if these 3 personalities will mesh enough for them to get to the finals. But I think it's going to be some bumps along the road, as we've already seen this season. So I think that's very interesting to monitor the rest of the season. But that's all I have for today's episode. That's going to conclude episode 32 of the Mr. Douglass Sports Show. Until next time, salute.